Let's have a look at the Beatitudes. In this audio, we will look at the overview of the Beatitudes and looking at it from a more general direction of the purpose of the Beatitudes and who the Beatitudes for and what is the outcome of the Beatitudes as intended by Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount begins with what we now know as the Beatitudes. The 8 Beatitudes describe the true and the only source of happiness. And with that as a front, the rest of the sermon is all commentary on how to apply these radical teachings of the Beatitudes to everyday practical life. Well, the Sermon on the Mount's real purpose is really for Jewish disciples then, believers of Christ, believers who had already accepted him as the Messiah. This sermon is targeted directly at disciples. Well, of course, by inference, it's also intended for all Christians today, especially for those of us who know how important it is that we're now living in the last days. This Sermon on the Mount defines true Christianity. The Christians, the followers of Christ, if you like, are to be different. They are called to be different from both the nominal church and the secular world, different from both the religious and the irreligious. It calls Christians to stand out. This sermon included a value system, ethical standard, level of devotion and attitude towards money, towards ambition, lifestyle and relationship at complete odds with the non-Christian world. One would call it a counterculture. It was a counterculture then, just as it is a counterculture now. The important thing to realize that this counterculture or this new lifestyle, if you like, cannot be produced by us trying. This lifestyle can only be experienced by those who have experienced the new birth, the new person, and who have the Holy Spirit dwelling in them. So this counterculture is not about trying to be who you ought to be. It is about being who you ought to be, completely adopting a new self and a new direction given to you as gift from Christ. This simply stems from the understanding that when you do believe, you become a new person. And the new person, called this believer, should bear fruit from this conversion. The fruits of this conversion are clearly seen in its thinking, in its speech, and in its action, and more importantly, in its attitude. In short, this Sermon on the Mount, starting with the Beatitudes, describes the character and conduct of a post-conversion Christian. A post-conversion Christian that would live a counter-cultural lifestyle. This counter-cultural lifestyle goes totally opposite to what the Pharisees used to teach at that time. They taught that salvation results when a person follows a certain necessary rules and regulation. But Jesus Christ condemns this type of legalistic religion. Having said all that, let's look at an overview of the Beatitudes. In essence, there are 2 parts to the Beatitudes. The first 7 Beatitudes, 7 out of 8, deals with a Christian's character and conduct. Then the final Beatitude, the 8th Beatitude, addresses a believer's attitude and his relation or her relationship with the world. The key word in the Beatitudes is blessed. What does blessed mean? Blessed, the original Greek when translated, really means happy. Now we ought to be very careful when we hear the word happy. The world, our secular world, of course, preaches that those who act responsibly and accumulate wealth are happy. But on the other hand, Jesus Christ says, if you are poor in spirit, if you are mourning about your failures, you are indeed happy. For the gospel is not for good people, but for the people who recognize their sinfulness and failures. A totally counterintuitive thinking then, just as it is now. Let's explore a little bit more into the Beatitudes. The 8 Beatitudes essentially describes the awareness of a Christian's attitude and his behavior after he or she has acquired this awareness. Beatitude 1 to 4 makes a Christian realize how a Christian feels about one's neediness. A true Christian realizes that he or she is spiritually poor, meaning lack of the spiritualness that is required. Then because of that, then the person mourn for this loss, mourn for the loss of being spiritually rich. And because of that, because of the realization that we are spiritually bankrupt, it makes us humble. It makes us meek, because now we know how dependent on God we are to achieve this level of spiritualness that is required. Then the 4th Beatitude says that when you realize that you're poor and you mourn for that loss, and you then become humble, you then hunger and thirst for the God's righteousness. Then Beatitude 5 to 7 points to what happens when these needs are fulfilled. Those satisfied with the righteousness of God, those who are fulfilled with the righteousness of God, will show the fruits of God. And blessed are those who then become merciful, and they become pure at heart, and they become peacemakers. Then finally, in Beatitude 8, it shows how society will treat this converted Christian, how society will persecute them. But then it says, get your joy out of this persecution, because it shows you how you have changed. People would mock you. People would offer you alcoholic drinks when you are at the restaurant just to mock you, to say, come on, join us. One more drink is not going to make you less righteous. People will make fun of you. You will start to feel that you may be like an outcast. You may even lose a good friend. But you feel great for not conforming to the needs and the wants of the secular world. You feel strong and you feel special in the moment of persecution, in the moment of being mocked. Then when you are at that stage, when you realize that you are strong, you get joy from being seen as having stood out and being seen as an outcast or being seen as countercultural, you know that you have shown evidence of the fruits of righteousness, and you know you are truly converted then. So, as an overview, this is what the Beatitudes is all about.